Hey guys, tonight we're taking a strange little journey underground, but not to a dungeon or a buried treasure vault or some haunted medieval crypt. No, tonight you're going for a walk through the sewers of 18th century Paris. And before you decide to click away and go find something more relaxing, let me make a promise. This is going to be one of the most soothing, weirdly fascinating trips you've ever taken, beneath the surface. Because down there under the powder-wigged finery and gilded balconies of Enlightenment Paris, there was a whole other world. Miles of arched tunnels, cool air that never quite shook off its smell, dripping stone, brick vaults, lamplight bouncing off wet limestone, and tourists. Yes, actual paying tourists. In fact, there were licensed sewer tour guides in Paris long before tourism was even a real industry. So as strange as it sounds tonight, you're going to follow the footsteps of the curious, the fashionable, and the slightly mad as they trudge below the city streets voluntarily to see how it all worked. You're going to walk next to gentlemen in silk stockings, noblemen holding embroidered handkerchiefs over their noses, and young writers pretending to be brave as they listen for rats. And you probably wouldn't last more than a few minutes. Not because it's dangerous, although slipping into a canal of effluent isn't exactly a relaxing end to your day, but because you'd be overwhelmed by the smell, the damp, the sheer sense of weirdness that comes from being somewhere designed not to be seen. And yet, in Enlightenment-era Paris, it became an attraction. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Let's begin with where you're standing. It's morning, though the sun doesn't reach you. You followed a man named Dubois, retired soldier, part-time guide, full-time enthusiast, down a narrow stairway carved into the edge of a public square. Behind you, the cobblestones are drying from an overnight rain. Children are running past with baskets of bread. Someone is shouting about onions. But in front of you, the world has changed. The staircase curves downward into a vault of shadow. A rush of cool air hits your face, earthy and sour. You blink in the half-light, adjusting to the lantern, swinging from Dubois' gloved hand. He doesn't flinch. He's been down here hundreds of times. But your shoes polished this morning and totally unprepared for this nonsense are already soaked. You descend. The walls are brick, and the ceiling is low. Not so low that you must crouch, but just low enough to make you feel like you should. Every 10 steps or so, a small alcove appears carved into the stone where water once pooled, or where workers once stored tools. You see a wooden ladder leaning against a wall leading nowhere. Moss. An iron ring. More moss. Your breathing slows. Not out of fear, out of wonder. This isn't just a tunnel. It's a system. A hidden city beneath a real one. Your guide begins to speak, his voice echoing strangely in the chamber. He tells you that the sewers were expanded under Louis XV with work, continuing well into the reign of Louis XV. That before this network existed, the streets of Paris were essentially open drains, that chamber pots were emptied from windows, that people walked with wide hats to shield themselves from, well, unexpected showers. But now he says with pride swelling in his voice, we have this. He gestures grandly toward a branching passage marked with a carved plaque, Égout Montmartre, 1762, a royal sewer. A marvel of engineering, and apparently a place of public interest. It started small. A few city officials wanted to see the new works, then a curious noble, then an architect, then someone with connections wrote about the experience in a letter, how surprisingly clean the walkways were, how noble the smell of industry, how vast the system seemed. And from there, tourism was born. Historians still argue whether these early tours were officially sanctioned or simply tolerated. Some believe the city saw them as a public relations tool, a way to show Parisians that their waste was being handled responsibly. Others think it was just another eccentric pastime of the elite. But whatever the reason, by the mid-1700s, there were men like Dubois all over the city, lantern-in-hand badge on coat stories at the ready. You follow him through a junction. He points out the curve of a wall. This bend, he says, allows water to pass without backflow. Revolutionary. He points out an iron pipe that one connects to the bakery on Rue des Archives. He pauses to let a rivulet of water flow past your boots. It's oddly hypnotic. The trickle, the echo, the way every footstep becomes a drumbeat in a concert of stone. You think maybe you understand the appeal, because yes, it's strange, yes, it's gross, but it's also impressive. A kind of engineering you can feel in your bones, and perhaps more importantly, it's real. It's not Versailles with its mirrors and gold leaf. It's not a painted salon where everyone pretends to be smarter than everyone else. This place doesn't care what you wear or how you speak, it just works. Quietly, consistently, every day. That in itself is oddly beautiful. Dubois leads you to a wider chamber. There are benches carved into the wall. He tells you this was a rest stop, that some of the longer tours, those attended by scientists or city planners, lasted hours, that once in 1775 a small concert was held here to demonstrate the acoustic properties of the tunnel. A violinist played, he says, and the sound carried all the way to the Seine. You sit on one of the benches and listen, not for music, just for the rhythm. Water, drip, brick, stone, everything echoing, everything continuing. The others in your tour group, yes, there are others, have mostly fallen silent. One man sketches the arch above you. A woman writes notes by candlelight. Another coughs quietly, holding a perfumed cloth to her nose. It doesn't smell as bad as you feared. Not great, but manageable. Dubois lights another lantern, hands it to you and nods toward the next passage. The tunnel curves again. The ceiling dips lower. You duck and keep going. Toward the next strange corner of the world, beneath a city you thought you knew. Welcome to the sewers of Paris. Welcome to a tour you'll never forget. And don't worry, we're just getting started. You've been underground long enough now that you've stopped noticing the cold. Not because it's any warmer, far from it. The air in the Paris sewers of 1760 has a damp chill that clings to your sleeves and seeps through the soles of your boots. But there's something about being surrounded by brick, stone and centuries-old engineering that makes you stop caring about the temperature. Down here your senses shift. The flicker of the lantern becomes your clock. The dripping of condensation becomes your music. The steady voice of Monsieur Dubois, your guide, your narrator, your historian, becomes the thread that ties it all together. He taps his walking stick against a stone marker in the tunnel wall. Égout du Faubourg Saint-Martin, 1745, it reads. You're standing in a corridor barely taller than your head, arched like the ceiling of a cathedral in miniature. You hear the muffled sound of water trickling somewhere below your feet, tucked beneath a grated path lined with slick moss. Dubois clears his throat. Before this, mes amis, he says, gesturing all around with a sweeping motion, Paris had no proper way to carry its filth. None. Just ditches, gutters, and prayers to Saint-Fiacre. You've heard of Saint-Fiacre before, patron saint of taxi drivers, and oddly enough, those suffering from hemorrhoids. Somehow that feels appropriate. He continues, it was Louis XIV who first declared the city needed sewers, but his idea never truly reached beyond the palace walls. It took a century of effort planning and, more importantly, Enlightenment logic to finally put waste in its place. The others in your group nod along. One man jots notes with a goosefeather pen. Another sketches the brickwork by lantern light. A woman with a fur wrap and a nervous nose wrinkles her face every time Dubois mentions waste, but still she doesn't leave. That says something. You take another slow step. Your boots make a soft splash. This place, you're realizing, isn't just a tunnel, it's a statement. And it's oddly soothing to know that even sewage in Paris has style. You reach a wider space now, a domed room with 3 tunnels branching away like the petals of a flower and a small raised platform at the centre. Dubois steps onto it, raises his lantern and says with the gravity of a preacher, "This is the Grande Confluence, where 3 neighbourhoods, Montmartre, Marais and Saint-Honoré, meet and become one." He pauses, then smiling slyly he adds, "Much like the salons above, only with more honesty." You chuckle softly despite yourself. A light breeze moves through the tunnel, not strong but steady. You can't tell where it comes from, but it seems to pull the air along like the breath of something living. The sewer system breathes, it carries, it connects. Dubois turns and beckons. "Shall we continue?" You follow. And as you walk, he talks. In 1740, the idea of touring a sewer would have made people laugh or gag, he says. But now it's fashionable, clean, organised. Engineers have drawn maps, marked junctions, created schedules. We even have trained workers with badges. He sees that last part with pride. His own badge, shaped like a bronze medallion, gleams from his vest. It bears the symbol of the city, a ship afloat on waves with the motto, "Fluctuat neque mergitur." She is tossed by the waves but does not sink. A fitting image for a city held up by tunnels. You pause at a small alcove where a lantern hook has been fastened into the brick. The iron is rusted. The flame casts a golden glow over a plaque Pont Neuf Intercept 1751. The bricks here are cleaner somehow. The slope of the floor more precise. This was considered the model section, Dubois says. Officials brought foreign guests here to show off our engineering. One Prussian called it the Cathedral of Cleanliness. You resist the urge to laugh, but you understand what he meant. Because here underground there's an odd elegance. The arches curve like ribs of a giant stone creature. The shadows fall in gentle waves. The floor rises and dips like an ancient deliberate riverbed. It's not just function, it's design. And that's when it hits you. This place is more than a sewer. It's a monument to control. You remember what Dubois said earlier, how before these tunnels Paris emptied itself wherever it could. Streets flooded, courtyards stank, people lived among their own waste. But here waste has been tamed, given direction, managed. That's what the 18th century was really about, wasn't it? Not just light and knowledge and powdered wigs, but order, categorization, everything in its place, even the filth, especially the filth. Historians Dubois says now, sensing your thoughts, as if reading them from the tunnel walls, still debate whether this fascination with sewers came from science or spectacle. Was it genuine admiration, or just a new thrill for those too refined for blood sports? You imagine it, ladies in silk gowns peering nervously into the darkness, escorted by mustachioed guides through dripping halls, men in powdered wigs nodding seriously at water channels, artists sketching arches by lamplight. It's absurd, and also kind of lovely. Because even something as unpleasant as sewage becomes in Paris something worthy of attention. A topic for salons, a place for tours. You turn a corner, and for a moment everything is quiet. The lantern light falls on a perfectly still pool of water. A drop falls from above Plip. The sound echoes like a tiny bell. The rest of your group walks ahead, their shadows flickering against the walls. You linger, just for a moment. Let your eyes adjust. And you begin to notice the details. The faint grooves in the stone from where tools scraped a century ago. The moss that forms in lines where condensation runs. A tiny carved face someone's private joke set into the brick. A nose, a wink. Dubois returns. Not all of it is on the map, he says. That's what makes it interesting. He gestures to the next tunnel. This way, please. You follow him, boots scraping gently on stone. You're deeper now, farther from the light, and yet oddly more comfortable. like the city above has faded into background noise. Here there's only the path, the walls, the stories. You glance down at your hands. They're a little dirtier than before. Your shoes, definitely wet. But you're not hurrying, you're learning. And in this quiet, strange, wonderfully designed labyrinth beneath the glittering world of Paris, you found something unexpected. A kind of peace, a kind of order, and a history that is not written in books but in bricks, in echoes, in drops of water falling one at a time. This Dubois says with pride as he taps a stone is civilization, and it runs underneath your feet. Your feet are beginning to adjust to the damp stone beneath them, an odd mix of slipperiness and solid support. The longer you walk, the more the sounds of Paris above seem like a dream. You no longer hear carriages, no distant market chatter, no bells from Saint-Sulpice. Just the steady drip of condensation, the faint squish of your soles, and the calm murmur of Monsieur Dubois narrating everything you pass like a priest delivering a sermon to the faithful. Up above, life is gilded and powdered. The year is 1765. Men tip their hats as they pass in the Place Dauphine. Women glide through salons in gowns that would sweep entire tea sets off side tables. Paris is elegance. Paris is intellect. Paris is perfume and painting and revolution whispering under velvet. But here beneath all of that is the engine. The city above may shimmer, but it only exists because down here waste finds its way out. Quietly, invisibly, reliably. This underground world is a contradiction hidden yet celebrated. Filthy in purpose yet praised for its form. And as your lantern bounces its light along the curved tunnel walls, you begin to understand why people came here. Why they chose to walk through this place not out of necessity but curiosity. Dubois raises his lantern as you enter another junction, this one larger, drier, echoing in the most peculiar way. It's called the Galerie des Trois Voûtes, the Gallery of Three Arches. It's unusually symmetrical, perfectly proportioned. You look up and see that the vaulted ceiling has small circular vents carved into it like the eyelets in a corset. They allow airflow to reach the surface. It keeps things moving even in places where the water is slow. There were whispers, Dubois says, with a sly grin, that this chamber was once proposed as a dining hall. You blink. A sewer dining room, someone from the group asks, half laughing. Dubois shrugs. The architect thought it would impress foreign visitors, a triumph of hygiene. Thankfully it was never used for supper. Still, you can see why the idea had merit, at least to a mind obsessed with Enlightenment ideals. Symmetry, order, public works turned into civic shrines. A dinner here would have been a statement. Look what we control. Even filth obeys us. And that was the great project of 18th century Paris, wasn't it? Control. Above ground, the city was bursting at the seams. More people, more food, more refuse, more disease. So down here beneath the stones, the planners and thinkers of the era tried to compensate. Not just with shovels and bricks, but with philosophy. You follow the group into a narrower passage, single file now. The air gets wetter, the light dimmer, but still manageable. Dubois leads with confidence. This passage, he says, was added after a series of heavy rains in 1753. The Rue du Bac flooded. The mud came up to people's waists. After that, the city approved more underground work. You pause. Let that sink in. A storm led to a tunnel, a practical response. Logical, predictable. But it's more than that. It's a sign of how this system grew, not all at once, not with grand declarations, but little by little. Tunnel by tunnel, prompted by problems, solved by stone. A scholar walking just ahead of you whispers to his companion. Historians still debate whether these sewers were primarily reactive or proactive. Did Paris anticipate its future, or did it simply scramble to keep up? You think about that, and you realize the answer is probably both. Paris dreamed of control, of cleanliness, of progress. but it also reacted violently, desperately whenever nature pushed back. This then is the compromise, the sewer, both dream and necessity. Dubois turns again into a side tunnel. This one is darker. The water is deeper here. It rushes past in a shallow channel about a foot wide. Not dramatic, but fast, efficient. This, he says, is what made Paris better than the others. He stops. Hear that you all fall silent. There's a sound in the distance. Not water, not rats. A dull, rhythmic clank. The cleaning chain, he explains. It runs along this tunnel every third day, pulls debris along, keeps it from building up. You try to picture it, a long iron loop dragged through the sewer by workers or winches, and suddenly you're filled with admiration. Because this place isn't just here, it's working, even now, right now. As you walk through the past, some part of it is still alive. The group emerges into another open space, a little brighter. The ceiling here is higher, the air a little fresher. The brickwork is newer, less mottled with age. And in one corner, there's something you didn't expect to see: benches. Simple stone benches carved into the wall. Not part of the original build, added later perhaps in the 1750s. Dubois confirms it. For resting, he says. Early tours often lasted over an hour. You sit. Let your body relax for a moment. The bench is cold, but solid. The kind of solid that tells you someone took time to carve it, to plan for it, to think. Someone may need to pause here. You look around. The people on the tour are quieter now. No one's writing. No one's talking. They're just listening. To the quiet. To the drip. To the rhythm of the tunnels. You sip from your canteen. Eat a piece of bread you packed in your satchel, half dry from the morning but oddly comforting. Dubois sits too for a moment. He sighs, leans back, then says softly, "It's strange, no?" You glance at him. How a place built for waste can feel so peaceful. You nod, because it's true. There's a tranquility here that the salons above can't replicate. A kind of honesty. Nothing is hidden. The purpose is clear. The design unpretentious. And maybe that's what draws people. Not just the novelty of walking through a sewer, but the comfort of function. You stand again, stretch, and prepare to continue. Because the path winds on. The tunnels keep going. And the deeper you go, the more you realise that beneath all the powdered elegance and enlightenment speeches, Paris was held together by brickwater gravity and the stubborn will of people who refuse to let their city drown in itself. The tunnel narrows again as you leave the resting chamber, your boots echoing softly against damp stone. The group has grown quieter now, less chatter, fewer questions. There's a rhythm to the walk, a kind of solemnity that seeps in the deeper you go. It's not that anyone's scared. No one is about to get lost or swept away by a sudden flood. But everyone seems to have realised that they're no longer just tourists, they're witnesses to something strange, ambitious, and a little unbelievable. You're in the Paris sewer, and there's a licensed guide leading the way. He's dressed not like a labourer, but like a civil servant, dark coat, buttoned high trousers tucked into worn leather boots, a copper badge pinned to his lapel. He moves with the casual authority of someone who's walked this route 100 times, pointing out brickwork and air shafts with the ease of a man describing his own home. This, you realise, is Monsieur Tour Guide. Not just a man with a lantern, a profession, an identity. Back in the early 1700s, there was no such thing as a sewer tour guide. The idea of taking someone into a tunnel filled with the city's waste would have been absurd at best, criminal at worst. The sewers were places for workers, for maintenance crews, for the unlucky. But by the 1760s, everything had changed. Paris had begun to celebrate its infrastructure. The Enlightenment had shifted thinking across every level of society, philosophy, science, architecture, and even sanitation. And so, with a growing sense of pride, the city started inviting people to witness what lay beneath their feet. At first the tours were informal. A curious nobleman would ask a city planner for a glimpse underground. An architect might descend to study the arches. But soon the demand became steady, predictable, public. So the city responded and created a job. The earliest guides were drawn from the ranks of engineers, surveyors, and construction supervisors. These were men who knew the layout intimately, who had in many cases helped build the tunnels themselves. They were assigned a uniform of sorts, a dark coat, sturdy boots, and most importantly a medallion or badge denoting them as an official conduit d'égout, literally a conductor of sewers. You glance at the badge on your guide's coat. It's worn smooth around the edges, but the city symbol is still clear. A ship sailing on stylized waves, the motto underneath, Fluctuat nec mergitur. Tossed by the waves, but never sinking. It's the kind of motto that feels ironic down here, but also perfect. Monsieur Dubois adjusts his lantern and speaks. Before I guided, he says I worked on the Rue Saint-Denis project. My job was to test the slope. Every channel must fall just enough to keep moving. Too steep, it erodes the stone. Too flat, it stagnates. He grins. You learn to love angles. One of the visitors chuckles. You meanwhile are still marvelling at the idea that a man could make a career out of this. That there were people who woke up, buttoned their coats, polished their lanterns, and said, "Today, I will lead a group of strangers through an underground river of human refuse." And yet here you are, and he's good at it. The tour continues through another stretch of tunnel, narrower now with the walls closer together and the ceiling lower. Your shoulders brush the brick as you walk. The air is colder, the draft more noticeable. Somewhere behind you, someone coughs softly and pulls their scarf tighter. Dubois stops and points. Note the lantern hooks, he says. They're placed every 60 paces. That's the length of a rope we use for rescue drills. Drop your lantern, follow the wall to the next hook, and you're never lost. He lets that hang in the air, then adds with a wink. Of course, the real trick is not dropping the lantern. You grin. You like him. It's easy to imagine that these guides became local celebrities, known figures in a city that rarely celebrated its workers. They were practical, unglamorous, but essential. They knew the bones of Paris better than any nobleman or scholar ever could. And they had stories. Oh, the stories. Dubois launches into one now. About the time a visiting English lord insisted on riding a mule through the sewer for his tour. He brought the poor beast down the stairs, believe it or not. Thought it was charming. The mule was less amused. He pauses, then says, "They both fell into the canal near Pont Marie. The mule walked out. The lord had to be pulled out with a hook." The group laughs, a few people shaking their heads. You wonder if it's true. It probably is. If not exactly, then mostly. And that's enough. Historians today still debate whether the licensing of sewer guides was a stroke of genius or a bizarre indulgence. Some argue it legitimized necessary infrastructure, made it part of public consciousness. Others say it was just another form of upper-class novelty like butterfly collecting or lecturing your dinner guests about phrenology. But standing here in the half-dark, watching Dubois walk ahead with his lantern swaying and his voice echoing, you realise it doesn't matter. Because what he's doing worked. People came, people learned, people saw, and maybe that's what mattered most. He stops suddenly and gestures up at a small opening in the ceiling, a square hole carved through stone about the width of a wine barrel. "Anyone know what this is?" he asks. The group is silent. Dubois smiles. "It's a speaking tube," he says, "used by surface workers to call down. Shout into it and you'll hear it echo for blocks." He leans in and cups his hands. "Boulangerie," he calls. You hear the word bounce through the tunnel like a lazy echo. Boulangerie. Gérie. Re. Everyone laughs again. He straightens up. Used to be the sewer workers would order lunch that way. The bakers knew the calls. Would lower down bread on a rope. You glance at the tube, half expecting a baguette to come sliding through. No luck. But the image sticks. because suddenly the idea of a sewer guide doesn't seem so ridiculous. It seems real. You keep walking. And now, with each step, you feel the layers of the city above in a new way. You imagine the baker wiping flour from his hands, the butcher sharpening his knives, the noblewoman stepping out of her carriage, all of them walking above this tunnel, never knowing or maybe choosing not to know how close they are to the network beneath. But the guide knows. The guide always knows. And now, so do you. The tunnel takes a subtle turn to the left, so subtle you almost miss it. But Monsieur Dubois doesn't. He pauses, lantern raised high, and points to a faint groove etched into the curved stone. "This, mes amis, is one of our enlightenment lines," he says. Someone behind you murmurs enlightenment line. Dubois smiles. A term I use, yes. Not official, of course, but see how the wall narrows just here, and how the brick changes colour. That's the sign of a transition, older stone giving way to a newer idea. You step closer. Sure enough, the brick is different, smoother, more evenly laid with sharper mortar lines. The earlier part of the tunnel feels hand-hewn, almost rustic. This is precision. Planned, measured, rational. And suddenly you realise this tunnel is more than sewage and stone. It's Enlightenment philosophy made tangible. Up above Paris is a buzz with new ideas. People are gathering in salons to argue about science, liberty, the rights of man. Voltaire is scribbling witty insults about monarchy. Diderot is compiling an encyclopedia page by page meant to organise all human knowledge. Rousseau is out in the countryside being moody and barefoot. And down here the same spirit is at work, not in essays, in engineering. You walk slowly, your footfalls softer now, your breath steady in the cool air. Dubois' voice carries as he walks ahead, his lantern casting long shadows. The Enlightenment, he says, was not just about big words and dusty books. It was about light, about clarity, about reason. The sewers, strange as it may sound, became a kind of symbol for those ideals. You pass another plaque, Égout de l'Homme Armé, 1758. Below it, the initials of an engineer, JPB. Jean-Pierre Beaumarchais Dubois, says, tapping the stone with his cane, one of our greatest sewer minds. People remember his brother for writing plays, but Jean-Pierre... He leans in. He wrote flow sheets. You smile. The idea that someone could be remembered for flowcharts is oddly comforting. Historians today still discuss how Enlightenment ideals reshaped urban infrastructure. There are debates over whether sanitation was a side effect of Enlightenment thinking or one of its central goals. Some argue it was about aesthetics, removing the stink of the old world to make way for the new. Others say it was a moral imperative that cleanliness became synonymous with virtue. You keep walking. The tunnel feels wider now, cleaner. The water flowing beside you is faster, smoother. The walls curve in just the right way to carry echoes gently down the line. And you notice something else. There's light, not a lantern. Daylight. Faint. Filtered. Dubois stops again and gestures upward. Above you, a round glass disc is embedded in the ceiling, thick, fogged with grime, but clearly letting in a shaft of pale, natural light. It's called an oculus, he says, added in the last round of renovations. The idea was to connect the world above and the world below. You stare. The light feels sacred somehow, a reminder that you're not buried, you're just beneath. Dubois continues, voice softer now. Enlightenment thinkers spoke often of transparency, of casting light into darkness, of understanding what had once been hidden. These tunnels, they are literal expressions of that idea. He smiles. Down here nothing is hidden, everything flows. You stand beneath the oculus and close your eyes. The chill of the tunnel wraps around you, but the light cuts through it like a gentle blade. There's a comfort in that, a clarity. The group begins to move again, and your thoughts drift upward to the philosophers. You imagine Voltaire snarky and sharp, sneering at the monarchy, but also at the stench of old Paris. You picture Diderot scribbling entries for Égout in his great encyclopedia, explaining with perfect precision how modern waste systems reflect the order of nature. You even imagine Robespierre, not yet drenched in blood, speaking at a salon about how infrastructure is a citizen's right. This was an era of revolution, yes, but also of systems, of trying to understand the world and improve it. And what better metaphor than the sewer down here? Human waste doesn't fester. It moves. It has a destination. Dubois slows the group as the tunnel branches again. This time there's a small iron gate closed but not locked. He lifts a ring of keys from his belt, unlocks it with a clink and ushers everyone through. Beyond is something completely unexpected. A library. Well, not a proper one, but a dry alcove lined with stone shelves stacked with ledgers. Dozens of them. Some bound in leather, others wrapped in oilcloth. This is the registry, Dubois says, where records are kept. Flow rates, blockages, maintenance logs. Every tunnel in the system is documented here. He picks up a volume at random, opens it to a page filled with dense, careful handwriting. Numbers, dates, names, enlightenment. He says holding it like scripture is not just about thinking, it is about recording. So the next person knows what you did. You step closer, run your fingers along the spine of a nearby ledger. Volume 6, Égout de la Grève, 1756, 1761. You can smell the paper, old ink, damp leather. It's somehow more vivid than any museum. Someone asks, do people ever borrow these? Dubois snorts. They're not for borrowing, they're for remembering. He sets the book down gently and adds, the sewer, my friends, is not just a place of waste. It is a place of memory. You step out of the registry room with something heavy in your chest, not fear, not disgust, but awe. Because this is where ideas met stone, where enlightenment wasn't just theorized, but built. You walk in silence for a while, the sound of boots and trickling water the only noise. Then Dubois says, almost to himself, when I was young, I thought I'd study astronomy. You glance at him. But I ended up here, he continues, still surrounded by stars in a way, just inverted. Up there they burn, down here they drip. He laughs, and you realise this man is no ordinary guide. He's a philosopher in boots, and somehow in this cold, wet tunnel beneath a city obsessed with beauty, he's helping people see that even filth can have form, even waste can have wisdom, even darkness can be illuminated. Your boots tap gently on the stone as the tour continues winding deeper through Paris's intestinal underworld. The air here is cooler, still touched by currents from distant unseen chambers. Above you, the city bustles through another day in the mid-1760s markets. Chattering horses, clopping wigs, being powdered letters, being penned. Yet here, just meters beneath their feet, a group of curious Parisians is walking willingly through the world they spend most of their lives trying to ignore. And among them, perhaps most surprisingly, is a gentleman in embroidered waistcoat and silk gloves. His shoes, you're fairly certain, cost more than your entire wardrobe. He's frowning now, not from displeasure, but from intense concentration. He's not alone. A woman in a high-collared velvet dress follows behind him, her shoes wrapped in waxed cloth, her gloved fingers holding a handkerchief to her face. Dubois, ever the guide, takes no notice of their status. Or perhaps he does and simply doesn't care. His commentary continues at the same steady, reassuring pace. This tunnel, he explains, tapping the wall, was widened in 1759 to accommodate increased flow from the Palais Royal district. The nobles produce a surprising amount of waste. A few chuckles ripple through the group. But the joke, of course, isn't entirely false, because today's section isn't just about the tunnels, it's about who came down into them. And yes, you heard right. The elite, the wealthy, the cultured, even the aristocracy, took tours of the Parisian sewer. It seems absurd at first. People who wouldn't dream of stepping into a common tavern were paying to descend into a literal underworld of refuse. But they did. And not only that, they did it proudly. There are records, real records, of titled visitors requesting private viewings of the sewer network, of engineers summoned to noble salons to describe water flow and pipe systems in detail, of royal secretaries descending with full entourages and emerging to write glowing accounts of Paris's new underbelly of brilliance. There's even a rumour, a persistent, well-circulated one, that Madame de Pompadour herself once requested a tour. Some say it was out of personal curiosity. Others say she wanted to impress a visiting German prince with the city's infrastructure. Still others suggest she was just tired of Versailles and looking for a conversation topic no one else had claimed. Historians still debate whether that visit happened. No definitive diary entry confirms it, but the guides remember, Dubois certainly does. I was not there, he says, his voice low, conspiratorial. But my master was. He said she wore silver slippers, and they stayed dry. You want it to be true, because something about it makes sense. In a world obsessed with novelty, progress and status, what better flex than to descend into a place built for filth and emerge talking about engineering? To walk through a sewer and treat it like a salon. It was the ultimate Enlightenment move. The aristocrats who visited weren't just slumming, they were making a statement. That knowledge mattered. That Paris, unlike those other cities, and yes, they meant London, had tamed its chaos. And there was one more reason. Pride. Civic pride. These sewers weren't just hidden pipes. They were public works. They were monuments to human order, to Enlightenment ideals. The ability to say, yes, we know where our waste goes. Yes, we built tunnels for it. Yes, they work. Would you like to see them? It sounds strange today. But in a time when most cities still relied on cesspits, ditches, or the vague hope that rain would wash everything downhill, Paris's growing sewer system was a marvel. The elite knew that, and they wanted to see it for themselves. Dubois gestures toward a side chamber barely lit, just a faint gleam of lantern light reflecting off water. This, he says, is the royal branch. It runs from the Palais de Luxembourg. Some say the Queen herself ordered that it be paved. A man beside you scoffs. Surely not. Dubois shrugs. Maybe not. But it's the smoothest tunnel in the system. You tell me. You step inside. The walls are closer. The air is warmer. The floor, remarkably, is smoother, less pitted, almost tiled. And the scent, while still sewer-like, is milder, subtler, as if someone tried at some point to tame even the smell. It's strangely elegant in a quiet way. And you can picture it now. Ladies in gloves, men in wigs descending these steps, not with fear, but with fascination. They weren't wrong to be curious, because this place, for all its grime and function, is beautiful in its own way. There's something deeply calming about it. The symmetry, the low constant sound of water, the absence of spectacle. No actors, no tricks, just stone and purpose. You trail your fingers along the wall cold and smooth and realise that everything about this moment would have been unthinkable just a few decades before. The idea of walking underground, of admiring tunnels, of celebrating sewage. But the Enlightenment changed more than philosophy. It changed what people were willing to look at. And suddenly, filth wasn't just filth. It was data. It was civic infrastructure. It was a conversation starter. A few steps ahead, Dubois pauses near a drain and says, "There is an account from 1764, a Dutch envoy. He wrote that after touring the sewers, he no longer trusted a city whose waste he could not see." You think about that. In a time of kings and courtiers of mystique and illusion, someone found truth down here. It's comforting in a way, because beneath the layers of lace and protocol, people still wanted function, still wanted to see how the machine worked. even if the machine smelled like cabbage and old wine. You walk on. The group is more subdued now. You're not marvelling anymore. You're understanding that the Paris sewers weren't just a convenience. They were a philosophy made real, and the people who visited them, whether out of pride, curiosity, or a desire to outdo their fashionable friends, they were taking part in something honest, something lasting, something that still moves beneath the city even now. You step carefully as the tunnel begins to slope again, this time down toward a deeper section of the Paris sewer. The air cools noticeably, and with it comes a hush like the stones themselves are listening. The flickering lantern in Dubois' hand casts long shadows that stretch and dance across the curved brick walls, and the water in the central channel flows with a low, patient murmur. The group's chatter has faded completely now. People are quieter, more contemplative. Maybe it's the depth, or maybe it's the growing awareness that this isn't just a novelty anymore. This is something older, something living. This is the part of the sewer that feels less like a tour and more like a sacred space. Monsieur Dubois raises a hand and stops the group at a wide alcove carved neatly into the wall. A rusted hook juts from the brick, and dangling from it, just barely visible in the lantern light, is an object that doesn't belong to any museum or grand collection. It's a medallion, round and dulled with age, hanging on a fraying leather cord. This, Dubois says quietly, is the badge of guide number 12, assigned to this tunnel in 1768, issued by the city of Paris, retired in 1792. The group shifts in closer. The metal glints softly. Etched into its face is a crest, the city's old emblem, a ship tossed in waves beneath the motto, Fluctuat nec mergitur. Beneath that, a serial number. Below that, a name nearly worn away, René Vaillant. You stare at it for a long time, because it's not just a trinket, it's proof that the position of sewer guide wasn't a gimmick or a passing curiosity. It was an occupation, a civic role, recognised, structured, respected. You begin to picture it now, René Vaillant buttoning his coat in the early morning lantern, in hand badge on chest. Perhaps he walked these tunnels before the others were built. Maybe he memorised the turns long before they were mapped. He likely carried a cane like Dubois, and maybe even trained new recruits. His job, to walk visitors through the arteries of Paris, and explain with steady pride how waste found its way out of the city. Back in the 1740s and 50s, when the first real tours began, they were informal, a nobleman's whim, an engineer's boast. But once the idea caught on, the city had to formalise it. Too many people had gotten lost. Too many guides gave conflicting facts. One, according to Dubois, even led a group directly into a silt trap and had to be rescued by workers with hooks and ropes. So in 1764 a proposal was submitted, official guides trained in layout history, and safety would be licensed. Each would receive a numbered badge, a reinforced lantern, and a ledger for keeping track of visitors. It was quite serious, Dubois says, tapping the badge with his gloved knuckle. Each guide had a designated route, a register to sign, a quota, and inspections. You smile, because of course they did. The Enlightenment didn't stop at libraries and salons. It made its way down here too, into the tunnels, into how the city organised the men who led its visitors through waste and darkness. You look again at the badge. It's not shiny, not noble, but it radiates something far more interesting purpose. Dubois moves on and the group follows. The tunnel curves, then straightens, then opens again into a low, wide hall with alcoves on either side. You notice the walls are different here, less ornate, more functional. The bricks are darker, thicker. The mortar thicker still. This was part of the expansion under Louis XVI. Dubois explains, designed specifically with guided tours in mind. That catches your attention. They built parts of the sewer. For tourists, of course, Dubois says. Paris is nothing if not theatrical. He gestures toward the wall where a narrow stone bench runs along the entire length. For For the ladies in heels, he adds with a wink. The group laugh softly. You can see it now, groups descending the slick staircases in fine coats and corseted dresses, gasping not at the smell, but at the structure, at the brickwork, the arches, the engineering, all made cleaner, safer, more symmetrical for their comfort. And at the centre of it all, the guides. Dubois stops near another hook on the wall and pulls from his satchel a cloth-wrapped bundle. Carefully he unwraps it to reveal his own badge. It's heavier than you expect, brass freshly polished, the same ship crest, the same wave motif, and a new serial number 96. He holds it like it's part of his spine. This one's been in my family 3 generations, he says softly. My grandfather wore it. My father. Now me. You stare. You hadn't realised that guiding could be inherited. But it makes sense. Who else would know these tunnels so well? Who else would care to pass on their curves and junctions, the stories of blockages, upgrades and reroutes? The idea of a lineage of sewer guides. Parisian bards of brick and runoff feels oddly poetic, Dubois continues. My father used to say, you can't love Paris if you only walk its bridges. You must also walk beneath them. You won't forget that. As you walk, he tells more stories. About Etienne Lefebvre, the guide who sang his tour like a ballad. About Camille, the only woman to ever receive an official guide license before the Revolution. About a man named Jules, who used to carve portraits of his tour groups into the tunnel walls, tiny faces etched into stone lit for a moment by lanterns, then swallowed by the dark. You pass one such carving now. It's worn, faint, but it's there. A dozen little faces, a dog, a cane, a woman with a hat. The stone remembers. You stop walking for a moment, letting the group pass ahead. You rest your hand lightly against the wall. It's cool and solid. The bricks shift under your fingers, uneven from time and moisture, and you think about all the boots that came before yours, all the guides who led groups like this one, who pointed at plaques, who cracked jokes about runoff ratios, who stood in the flickering dark and said, "This way, please." It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered. And today, centuries later, you're still walking in their footsteps, because somehow this system, this network of waste became part of the city's identity. Not hidden, not shameful, just quietly necessary. And the people who kept it alive, they mattered too. You look ahead and see Dubois raise his lantern high. The light flickers off his badge. And suddenly you realise Paris didn't just license sewer tour guides. Paris respected them. The tunnel widens ahead almost imperceptibly at first. The ceiling doesn't just lift, it curves upward like the inside of a cathedral dome, giving the space a reverent echoing quality. Your footsteps become slower, steadier, like your body instinctively understands this is not just another part of the sewer, it's a stage. Monsieur Dubois slows his pace. His lantern sways a little lower. The flame flickers across the curved walls, revealing the subtle change in brick. These are older, darker stones. The mortar is tighter, the joints more even. There's intention here, design. He stops beside an archway worn smooth from decades, maybe centuries of palms brushing past it. "Welcome," he says, with a small theatrical bow to the Théâtre des Égouts, the theatre of sewers. You blink. Surely he's joking. But as you step through the arch into the large round chamber beyond, you realise he's not. The space opens like a surprise circular with a shallow depression at the centre, like an orchestra pit and wide stone benches carved into the wall. It's not ornate, it's not gilded or graceful, but it's clearly meant for an audience, and in a sewer no less. Here, Dubois says, as his voice echoes against the chamber's domed roof, was where Parisians gathered not to be disgusted but to be amazed. The chamber historically referred to in city records as La Grande Salle de Démonstration was constructed around 1763 as part of an experimental phase in public works outreach. City engineers believed with genuine conviction that if people could witness the function of the sewers with their own eyes, they would not only respect the system, they would celebrate it. And so guided tours evolved into something more ambitious. They became performances. Dubois leads you down the small staircase that spirals around the edge of the chamber. The air here feels heavier, cooler, but saturated like a wet sponge. You reach the floor of the stage where water flows lazily through a grated trench and disappears behind a thick iron gate. Above a narrow slit in the ceiling, an oculus allows daylight to trickle in like a spotlight. This room could fit 30, maybe 40 people, Dubois says. City inspectors, visiting engineers, even foreign nobility. They would descend from the surface with lace cuffs and velvet shoes, ready to be entertained by the art of effluent management. You laugh softly, but it's not mocking, it's surreal. Because the more you look, the more it becomes clear this was intentional. The benches are angled slightly toward the centre. The acoustics are carefully tuned. You can hear Dubois perfectly even as he lowers his voice. There's even a spot at the far end where the brickwork changes abruptly, a place where, according to records, temporary panels were installed to demonstrate water pressure channel redirection and cleaning techniques. You'd be amazed what got applause down here, Dubois says, stepping lightly onto the central platform. There were synchronised sluice gate openings, drainage tests, even a parade of sewer carts pushed by engineers in matching coats. One guest wrote in his diary that the underground theatre offered more honest drama than the stages of Versailles. He pauses, and in a way he was right, because this wasn't a metaphor. It wasn't a political statement or a wry critique. It was pride. Paris in the mid-18th century was reinventing itself, not just in salons and universities, but beneath its feet. And in that reinvention, it wanted the world to know, we handle our waste with style. You sit on one of the benches, the stone is cold but smooth. Worn by hundreds, maybe thousands of visitors before you, someone has carved a date into the side, 1767. No initials, no commentary, just a year. You run your fingers over it slowly. It's strange, you think, to be sitting in a sewer and feeling something close to reverence. Dubois continues walking in circles around the chamber, gesturing with practiced ease. There were standard performances, he explains. Speeches, demonstrations, little lectures about slope ratios and valve engineering. But the most popular guides were the ones who improvised. He lifts a finger in the air and recites theatrically. From palace to pavement, from table to tide, we guide the city's secrets with every stride. The rhyme is bad. The delivery is excellent. You and the rest of the group applaud softly. He grins. That was Jacques Lemoine. Known for his sonnets about sanitation. You glance around. This room really did host those events. It's not imagination. It's not embellishment. This was once a destination, a sensation, and maybe that's what surprises you most, not just that sewer tours existed, but that they were celebrated. Tickets were printed, schedules were arranged, city officials gave speeches. It wasn't lowbrow curiosity, it was civic theatre. Historians often gloss over this detail. The performances are seen as footnotes, oddities. But there are full journals, pages and pages detailing visitor impressions. Some compared it to the workings of a clock, others to the anatomy of a living creature. One particularly enthusiastic German guest wrote that it felt as though I had stood inside the lungs of the metropolis. Dubois nods toward a patch of cleaner brick. There, he says, is where a plaque once hung. A bronze marker gifted by the city of Lyon congratulating Paris on its subterranean enlightenment. The plaque is long gone, melted down during the revolution perhaps, but the story remains. And isn't that the point? That the sewer, a place built for filth, became a repository of meaning. Dubois steps off the central platform and motions for the group to follow. There's one more thing, he says. He leads you around the curve of the chamber to a small side room. You step inside and find a dusty shelf sealed behind glass. Inside, resting like relics, are 3 objects. a rusted hand crank, a folded city map water-stained and faded, a small metal box latched shut. Dubois opens the box with a soft click. Inside is a whistle, plain, brass, worn at the mouthpiece. This, he says, belonged to Henri Dufour. He was the guide here for 22 years. Every show began with this whistle. One short blast, then silence. Then, he raises a hand dramatically. The water would come. He doesn't explain further. He doesn't have to, because in your mind you can see it, hear it, feel it. The crowd of visitors falling silent, the hiss of sluice gates opening, the rush of water echoing in the vault, the applause, the awe, the pride. In that moment you realise that this wasn't just a quirky pastime, it was ritual, one that said, look what we've built, look what we can manage, even this. You step out of the chamber and into the narrow tunnel again, the echo of your own footsteps now louder than before, because you've just seen something few people today even know existed. A theatre for sewage, a stage for order, and a performance that never truly ended. The air changes again, not in temperature, not in humidity, but in texture. It thickens slightly, grows heavier around your ankles like it's carrying a secret. The tunnel is darker here, narrower. Your group bunches up instinctively, lanterns lifted higher, voices hushed. Dubois' tone changes too. Less theatrical now, more careful. This, he says softly, is the part of the tour some people didn't like. You look around. There's nothing different, not really. The same brick walls, the same damp floor, the same trickle of water weaving its way through a grated channel. And yet, it feels different, like the tunnel is holding its breath. Dubois steps aside and gestures toward a branching corridor. It disappears into darkness almost immediately. Unlike the main artery, this one has no visible end. We used to call that one the Gallery Fantôme, he says. The Phantom Gallery. Not because of ghosts, but because of stories. He lets the silence stretch a little, of rats, and things that never came back out. There it is. You've reached the myth section of the tour, and yes, of course, the Paris sewers had myths. With miles of tunnels, multiple levels, and entire districts that had never been fully mapped, stories were inevitable. But down here they weren't just whispered, they were encouraged. Some guides told them straight-faced, others built their reputations on them. There was always a rumour, Dubois begins leading you forward, that somewhere in the tunnels was a rat larger than a dog with red eyes. It knew the system better than any guide. It could sense new visitors. It would wait near intersections, and if someone strayed from the group, he pauses, no one breathes. It would follow. A few in your group laugh. Nervously. Dubois grins. Not a single case ever confirmed, of course, but people swore they heard scratching, heavy footsteps, even voices. You move on deeper into the darker section of the sewer where the air gets stiller as if waiting. Historians today argue over how much of this was exaggeration, how much folklore. Some say the stories served a purpose, scaring tourists just enough to keep them close to their guide. Others claim the myths were part of a city-wide coping mechanism, a way to give shape to the anxiety of living above something so vast, so essential and so out of sight. And yet there's always a little truth in every tale, because Paris did have rats, so did every city. But in Paris they weren't just animals, they were characters. There are letters from the period that describe the squeaking chorus beneath Saint-Denis. One visitor described an encounter with a wall of fur scattering like shadows when the light struck. Another claims to have seen a nest the size of a wine cask, complete with shiny trinkets collected from surface markets. Dubois gestures to a collapsed wall on the left, stones caved in like broken teeth. You can see claw marks on the soft mortar. You hope they're old. Workers used to joke that rats ran their own tours at night, he says. Same route. Better attendance. You smile despite yourself. Then he stops again and points to a tiny archway, a drain no wider than your shoulders. This, he says, is where the strangest rumours came from. According to sewer law, that narrow passage leads to a buried chamber, long abandoned, unmapped. And in that chamber, they said, was something impossible, a garden. Not a metaphorical one, a literal one. Rooted in the damp floor, fed by runoff lit by a shaft of light from a forgotten oculus. The plants were strange, pale, soft. The soil was warm to the touch. No one could explain how they survived. Some said the plants were medicinal, others said they were poisonous. A few even claimed the garden could shift, moving subtly through the system like a ghost ship. There's no proof, of course. But Dubois lowers his voice and says, "My grandfather said he saw it once. Said it smelled like citrus and smoke. You don't ask questions. You just keep walking. Because part of you doesn't want to know if it's real. It's more fun this way." Dubois continues telling stories now like lullabies. A skeleton found bricked into a wall still wearing boots. A sewer worker who claimed he once heard music below the Palais Garnier. A lost tunnel said to echo your name back in Latin if you whispered it alone. Some visitors in your group chuckle, others stay quiet. You're somewhere in between. Caught between skepticism and the kind of sleepy wonder that comes from being very far from sunlight and far too deep into something ancient. Because the myths ridiculous or not do something important. They remind you that the sewer is more than just water and waste. It's alive. Not in the biological sense, not literally, but in the way that every old system is. It grows, it forgets, it remembers, it develops habits, legends, personalities. And when people walk through it century after century, they leave something behind. Not just coins or scratches in the brick, but stories. You reach a smaller chamber now. The floor dips, the water is louder, and on the far wall someone has painted something. Not graffiti older, carefully done in soot or oil, a mural, faint but visible. It shows a rat huge regal wearing a crown made of twigs. Beneath it, a single word, Regent. King of the Tunnels, Dubois says quietly. Painted in 1770, we think. No one knows who made it, or why. The group stares. You do too. Not because you believe it, but because some part of you kind of wants to. And that's the thing about the Paris sewers. They are real, but they invite you to dream. Even when you're standing in the dark, shoulder to shoulder with strangers, the stones slick with centuries of condensation, the air humming faintly with runoff. You're not just walking through history, you're walking through imagination. And that may be the most enduring part of all. The tunnel ahead is broad and clean by sewer standards, the kind of corridor that makes you forget momentarily that you're underground. The air is damp, yes, but it moves. A faint draught brushes your face, carrying with it the scent of earth water and old stone. The torchlight plays gently on the walls, revealing tighter brickwork, smoother mortar, and strangely more signage. Signs etched in stone, hammered in metal, even stenciled in fading black paint dates, arrows, names, and numbers. You've entered the practical heart of the Paris sewer system. No longer a space for performance or myth, but for function, real, measurable, urgent. This is the part that got things done. And the moment your boots land on the dry flagstones of the main causeway, Dubois turns to face the group with a quieter, more serious voice. We have now left the galleries of performance, he says, and stepped into what became in time one of Paris's most important defences, not against armies, but against disease. The statement lands softly in the brick-echoed hush. For a moment you try to imagine what it would have been like to be a citizen of Paris in 1770, a time when the plague still lingered in memory if not in daily life, when people still feared miasma's bad air and believed sickness floated through city streets like a ghost, when sudden fevers spread from one neighbourhood to the next and no one could explain why. This is where the sewer became not just a curiosity, but a crucial tool of survival. Dubois gestures to a wide plaque embedded into the wall. It's plain stone but neatly carved. The inscription reads Égout de Paris, révisé pour la santé publique, 1772, Paris sewers revised for public health. It's subtle, but revolutionary. He leads the group a few steps further into the chamber where a shallow channel of fast-moving water disappears into a grated archway. You see, he says, for most of its early life the sewer was an aesthetic victory, a symbol of control. But by the 1770s something changed. The thinkers of the city, its engineers, philosophers, physicians, began to draw a connection between waste and wellness, between runoff and rot, between what lay underfoot and what ended up in your lungs. You stare at the grate. Behind it, you hear the water tumble away, pulled by gravity into darkness. The rhythm is calming, steady. Dubois explains how this growing understanding led to real change. Engineers began working with doctors. Measurements were taken. Stagnant water was mapped. Tunnel slants were recalculated to ensure faster movement of effluent. Sluices were redesigned. Drainage grids above were reshaped to filter out debris. Some tunnels were sealed. Others were widened. Whole neighbourhoods were retrofitted not for elegance but for hygiene. Historians still argue whether this marks the first true instance of modern urban sanitation planning. Some credit London's later overhaul, others point to Rome's aqueducts. But in Paris, here underground in 1772, there was a real documented shift. You pass under another archway, this one lined with reinforced ribs of iron and carved with a repeating inscription, Puis secours, ventilation obligatoire emergency shaft. Ventilation required. It's not theatrical, it's not beautiful, but it's human, designed to keep people safe, to keep air moving, to keep rot and disease from festering. Dubois pauses beside a small recess in the wall where a wooden bench, mossy and cracked, sits half forgotten. This was once a medical station, he says. Inspectors would stop here after walking the drains, check their breath, wash their boots, clean their hands in vinegar. You imagine the scene: a man in a thick coat, a cane, a scarf around his nose, a tin bowl of sour liquid and a rag. He's tired, maybe sick, maybe not yet, but he's trying to stay well in a place no one else dares to go. And you realise this system wasn't just about the people above. It was about those down here too, the workers, the cleaners, the ones who kept it running. In 1774, a minor outbreak of fever in the Low Districts prompted the Paris Health Commission to re-evaluate tunnel schedules. Inspections doubled, air shafts were widened, vent grates were mandated near bakeries, butchers and slaughterhouses, and perhaps most interestingly, a public sewer ledger was published handwritten, bound, and made available at select town halls. It included flowcharts, problem points, and advice. Simple phrases like flush with boiled water weekly or leave the grates unblocked. Civic-minded recommendations grounded in what little science they had and what deep instinct they trusted. You glance over at Dubois as he gently wipes away a layer of grime on a plaque with his glove. The words beneath read, La propreté est une forme de paix. Cleanliness is a form of peace. You're not sure who wrote it. It's not attributed, but it feels right. He turns back to the group, and that he says was the turning point, when the sewer stopped being the hidden shame of the city and became its quiet protector. You move further into the tunnel. The sounds of the surface are completely gone now. The only noise is water and footsteps. It's calming in a strange way. You pass by what looks like a series of narrow alcoves, each fitted with a wooden shutter. One is open, revealing a stack of clay pots labelled with faded handwriting. Samples, Dubois explains, from early tests, sediment, flow residue. They kept records here, tested for foulness by sight and scent. Before microscopes, before thermometers. You pause. One pot is dated October de 1778, Rue Mouffetard. It's heavy in your hands, smells faintly of rust and thyme. You set it back gently. The group continues forward. Someone asks how many people the sewer system saved. Dubois stops walking. He smiles softly. No one knows, he says. No one counted. That's the thing about prevention. Its victories are always invisible. That silence, the kind that wraps around you when someone tells the truth, fills the tunnel. You pass another drain, this one flowing strong and fast. Dubois taps his cane against the iron bar. This, he says, is Paris breathing. And maybe it is, because the more you walk, the more you realise you're not just underground. You're inside a living thing, a structure with memory, with lungs, with intention, designed not to be seen but to keep everything else alive. It makes you feel small, but safe. Because if this system could survive revolution, war, neglect and time, then maybe the city can too. And maybe you above it all can rest a little easier knowing that down here in the dark something is always at work, always flowing, always cleaning, always watching over. You notice the change before Dubois says a word. The tunnel ahead is noticeably wider, the ceiling arching higher than before with a kind of deliberate symmetry that tells you this wasn't just dug out for function, it was meant to be seen. The brickwork is newer here, tighter and smoother, and the side channel carrying the runoff water glides more cleanly than in previous sections, like it's been recently cleared. Dubois walks a little more slowly now, letting your group take it all in. He stops beneath a wide archway framed with iron bracing, and there's a moment of almost architectural reverence in his posture as he turns to face you. This, he says, is where we move from curiosity to commerce. You raise your eyebrows slightly, not because you doubt him at this point you'll believe anything, but because you hadn't quite expected to hear that word down here. Commerce. He nods toward the corridor ahead. By 1775, the tours were no longer simply informal favours for nobles or enthusiastic lectures for engineers. They became something more organised. And like all things in Paris, once something becomes popular enough to be repeated, it becomes something that can be sold. You follow him forward. The tunnel curves gently and opens into a large vestibule-like space, arched, tiled, and lined with stone benches that have clearly been worn down by centuries of visitors. Dubois gestures to the floor. Stand here, and you're standing where hundreds, perhaps thousands, once waited in line. You look down. There are shallow footprints worn into the stone, scuff marks, the faint edge of what was once a painted line. This was a queue, Dubois confirms, a literal queue. People would wait here for their assigned tour time, sometimes in pairs, sometimes entire families. The idea is astonishing, but he's not done. The Bureau de Travaux Publics, he continues, began issuing formal time slots in 1776. They printed tickets, posted notices, even began experimenting with numbered groupings like seats at the opera. He pauses, and yes, people paid. You blink. 5 souls per person, he says. Children were sometimes allowed in for free, but only if they were deemed old enough not to fall into the channels. You laugh quietly. This is real. This happened. People bought tickets to walk through a sewer, and not just the rich either. Dubois explains that the popularity of sewer tours quickly moved beyond the elite. By 1777, even members of the merchant class were taking part. Shopkeepers, clerks, bakers, teachers, visitors from the countryside. It became something to do on a slow afternoon, an experience, a curiosity, and if you could afford it, a story to tell at supper. There were even newspapers that published reviews. One 1778 column from the Gazette de Paris described a new tour route as more immersive than expected, and complimented the guide's ability to explain pressure management with charming brevity. And you begin to realise this wasn't just sightseeing, it was the birth of infrastructure tourism. Dubois pulls from his coat a folded page of yellowed paper and opens it carefully. It's a reproduction of an original schedule. You lean in to read. Ce qui dégoût était en 1779, départ quotidien, 9h, 11h, 14h, 6h. Routes are labelled by quadrant nord, sud, est, west. Each guide is listed by number. You recognise one, number 31 Vallon. Dubois taps it. That was my great-grandfather's circuit. The pride in his voice is unmistakable. You walk together now through what was once the busiest corridor in the entire system. You can see the subtle flourishes meant to impress the public, engraved plaques, ornate drain covers and lantern hooks polished smooth by constant use. This entire stretch, Dubois says, gesturing to the walls, was redesigned in 1776 to accommodate heavier foot traffic. Not for waste management for people, the realisation sinks in. They renovated the sewer for tourists. Dubois leads you into a side alcove. On the wall is a faded mural barely there now, but you can make out shapes, arches, tunnels, and a row of tiny human figures carrying lanterns. It's called Le Défilé des Guides, he says, a tribute painted by workers in 1780, a kind of badge of honour. Below it is a brass hook. From it hangs a wooden sign, battered but legible Belletterie Prochaine Tour, 16 Judd, ticket office, next tour, 4 p.m. You smile. It feels like a forgotten Disneyland. Dubois leans back against the wall and says, they even considered installing a coffee vendor near the main stairwell at Rue Saint-Martin. Did they? Someone asks. He shakes his head. Too many accidents with boiling water. But the idea was there. You picture it, someone offering roasted chestnuts and coffee as Parisians queue to explore the underworld. It's ridiculous and perfect. Then Dubois says something that sticks with you. For all its grime, he says the sewer gave people a sense of ownership, of understanding. For the first time they could walk through the parts of the city that usually stayed hidden. It wasn't just a spectacle. It was a democratization of knowledge. The group continues down the passage, and soon you come to a stone niche carved into the wall. Inside is a small box, wooden, locked with a rusted hinge. A faded inscription on the front reads, Offres et pourboires, donations and tips. Visitors would sometimes leave coins, Dubois explains, or little notes. One man reportedly left a small loaf of bread every Thursday for his favourite guide. You look at the box for a long time. It's a reminder that these tours weren't just city projects, they were relationships between Parisians and their city, between workers and the curious, between people who wanted to know how things worked and people willing to show them. By the time you emerge from the ticketing corridor, the light in the tunnel has changed again. It's golden now. Late afternoon is seeping in from somewhere above, filtering through a wide grate and casting patterns on the floor. Dubois glances up. He says nothing for a moment. Then funny, isn't it? You glance over. That down here, he says, where the city hides its messiest truths. People once came for wonder. You nod, because now you understand why. The light above fades gently as the group moves onward. You're deeper now, farther from the stairwells and grates that let in fresh air and curiosity. There are no signs of showmanship here, no polished walls, no clever plaques. The bricks are darker, the smell more honest. The tunnel ahead is narrower, sloping downward slightly, its curve gentle but insistent. You're entering the true working core of the Paris sewer. Dubois turns, raising his lantern. Here, he says, is where most of our visitors would realise what they'd really signed up for. He's not being dramatic, because this was the part of the tour that separated the curious from the committed. Not just because it was darker or less pleasant, but because it brought people as close as possible to the actual process, the smell, the sound, the flow, the labour, the real sewer. The tunnel around you now is one of the oldest. Built during the earliest phases of modernisation under Louis XV, it wasn't designed with visitors in mind. Its floors are uneven. The side channel is wide and fast. The air is thick with something pungent, not dangerous, but unavoidable. This is the part of the network where smaller neighbourhood runoff lines converge, picking up everything the city sheds: wash, water, food, waste, rain, refuse. Dubois slows his pace. "We've arrived," he says quietly in the belly of the beast. You look ahead. The tunnel opens into a cavernous hall, not wide but tall, its ceiling disappearing into shadow above you. At its centre is a roaring channel of water, dark and rapid, carrying everything that thousands of people discarded this morning. It surges beneath a narrow stone bridge, no rails, just flat stone spanning the current. Dubois steps confidently onto it and turns back, beckoning you forward. You follow, and as you do, something happens. The noise surrounds you, rushing water, echoing drips, the occasional clang of a distant pipe. You can no longer hear the city above or the rest of the group behind you, just the mechanics of movement. It's startling and strangely peaceful. This, after all, is the part of the tour that was often referred to by guides as the baptême réel, the real baptism. Because here beneath the glamour of Parisian elegance was where people encountered how the city truly functioned. And it made an impression. Dubois tells the story of a nobleman who once fainted mid-bridge, of a visiting duchess who refused to cover her nose and declared, "There is something noble in the scent of industry," of a school teacher who returned with his students every spring saying, "If they can understand this, they'll understand civics." You step off the bridge, heart still drumming slightly from the sound, and rejoin the group on the other side. There's a carved niche in the wall, and within it a rusted winch with a large iron handle. Used to operate a sluice gate, Dubois explains. Guides would turn it as part of the demonstration. It would open upstream and send a pulse of water through the tunnel. He reaches out and cranks it gently. It groans, and from somewhere upstream you hear a low rising rush. Seconds later, the water level in the main channel surges, not dangerously but noticeably. A powerful, steady wave sweeping through, clearing debris, speeding flow. You watch it pass. That, Dubois says, was the part everyone remembered, because it made things real. It showed that the sewer wasn't passive. It wasn't just a tunnel for water to drift through. It was managed, regulated, maintained by real people, real tools, real systems, and that's what the tours revealed. Not just clever brickwork or charming guides, but that this world matters. That beneath the powdered wigs, beneath the salons and music and books, someone still had to turn the handle. Someone still had to keep the city alive. Dubois walks toward a stone platform elevated slightly above the main passage. He climbs it and points to a wide stretch of floor covered in slate tiles. On one side, baskets, crates and old wooden bins stacked and labelled. This, he says, was the staging area, the part of the tour where visitors saw the tools, the real ones. You step forward. Even though most of the implements are gone, the signs remain. Iron rakes, troughs, long-handled brushes, buckets with slotted bottoms, a pair of tongs taller than a man used to retrieve things, lost tools, occasionally even animals from the water. Some of the group members take notes, others murmur quietly. You just stand there breathing it in, not just the air but the idea of it. That this was visible once, that the sewer wasn't hidden, that people came not to look away from filth but to understand it. Historians today point to this section as the most impactful part of the 18th century sewer tours. It gave people a framework for thinking about public services not as distant magical functions, but as labour, as care, as the result of human decision-making. There are anecdotes, lots of them, about visitors returning from the tour and speaking differently about workers, about taxes, about the importance of planning. A poet named Charles Lemieux wrote, "What the sewer taught me is that the noble city does not rise above the gutter, it grows from it." Dubois recites that line now almost like a prayer. You pause, because you're not just seeing infrastructure anymore, you're seeing something deeper. that this place, loud, wet, smelly and solid, became a space of reflection. And maybe that's why the tours endured, not just for the novelty, but because they allowed Parisians to reconcile their beauty with their waste, to acknowledge the contradiction, to marvel at it, to own it. The sewer wasn't just below the city, it was the city, a parallel Paris, one that moved slower, darker, but no less important. You look down at the channel again. The water has calmed, your reflection wavers, but it's there, and you wonder as Dubois leads the group onward how many people walked these same steps centuries ago and saw themselves in the flow, not as nobles, not as workers, but as citizens, connected, accountable, and finally just a little more awake. The further you go, the more the tunnels stop feeling like a curiosity and start feeling like a machine. Not one of gears and pistons, but of flow, designed purposeful, alive in its own quiet rhythm. Monsieur Dubois moves slower now, not from fatigue, but from a certain reverence. It's as if the very air here deserves silence. You walk behind him into a large vaulted chamber. The walls are darker, the bricks older chipped. You can see where time has worked on this place, not destroying it, but shaping it. The path leads around a central opening like a giant circular drain ringed with stone. Water spirals beneath you in a deep vortex, disappearing into blackness. Dubois calls this place Le Coeur, the heart. From here, he says, Paris exhales. You pause listening. There's no birdsong, no bells, just water rushing deep beneath the stone. It hums through your feet like a distant drum. This is where everything goes. Every drop from every wash basin, every rain puddle from the Palais Royal, every spill from a butcher's stall in Saint-Denis, it all passes through this place. You take a breath, and with it, you feel something shift. The tour is no longer about observation. Now you're inside the pulse. Dubois continues. In the 1780s, something changed, he says. People stopped seeing the sewers as just engineering. They began to see them as something more symbolic. He leads you down a spiral path carved along the chamber wall. At the bottom is a narrow tunnel branching away into the dark. This tunnel, he says, was the first to be named not for a street, but for an idea. He points to the arch above. Égalité. Equality. You feel it land in your chest. This was no accident. He explains, after decades of sewer expansion, the engineers began giving the tunnels names not based on the geography above, but on Enlightenment ideals. There's a tunnel named Raison Reason, another Justice. A short corridor simply marked Lumière Light. You pass a plaque Fraternité, 1783. It's not chipped or worn. It was carved carefully, deeply meant to last. Dubois speaks quietly. By then the idea had taken hold, that down here beneath the city was a kind of ideal society, a place where everything worked, where every drop of water mattered, where nothing was wasted and nothing was hidden. Historians today argue whether these names were given as political statements or poetic flourishes. Some insist they were part of a conscious effort to mirror Enlightenment values in civic design. Others say it was simply a fashion away for engineers to feel they were part of the intellectual revolution of their time. But Dubois doesn't argue, he just shows you. You follow him into Égalité. The tunnel is modest but symmetrical. Its channel carries only a small flow, probably runoff from a residential quarter. But it's smooth, clean. The work here was done with care. He stops at a wall of old pipes, each one labelled in hand-painted script. You notice how they all join into a single channel. Many become one, flowing the same direction. You get it. You see Dubois says up above people were arguing, protests, pamphlets, politics. But down here everything moved together. You look at him. He's not being romantic, he's being literal. The sewer worked. No matter your name, your title, your class, your waste came here, and from here it moved along with everyone else's. There was no hierarchy in the flow. That idea, the equality of runoff, isn't something most people think about, But now you are, and maybe that's the point. Dubois leads you to a side alcove. Inside, behind a glass pane, are 3 objects: a worker's coat, a brass flow gauge, a leather-bound journal. This belonged to Claude Renard, he says, one of the first engineers who spoke openly about the sewer as a social model. He wrote that the order found below must someday guide the chaos above. You scan the journal through the glass. His handwriting is delicate, neat. There are charts, maps, a line underlined twice: La fonction fait l'égalité. Function creates equality. It sounds almost revolutionary, because it was. Dubois guides the group back into the main tunnel. The ceiling here is higher again, ribbed with thick arched support beams. The sound of the water is softer, less a rush, more a whisper. He stops at another plaque. This one is larger, carved in stone. Gold leaf lettering faded but still proud. À ceux qui ont vu dans les égouts une société meilleure. To those who saw in the sewers a better society. You feel something in your throat tighten, because by now this isn't just a walk underground. It's a portrait of how people once dreamed of fixing the world, not with speeches, but with tunnels, not with declarations, but with drains. Dubois doesn't say anything for a while. He lets you feel it, and you do. The weight of it, the sincerity, the stubborn, unglamorous hope of it all. That maybe, just maybe, a society could learn from a place where everything had its channel, its role, its flow. A place where nothing was too dirty to be managed, where nothing was above the system. He continues walking. You follow. Somewhere above you the city pulses with noise markets, bells, carriages. But down here in this slow, wet, echoing world, you're seeing Paris as few ever do. Stripped of beauty, stripped of politics, laid bare, and somehow all the more powerful for it. Because this, the sewer, isn't just where the city hides its shame. It's where it keeps its integrity, where ideas were turned into bricks, where flow became policy, where someone said we must do better and then got to work underground. You glance back at the plaque one more time, and you understand why guides like Dubois are still here, still walking, still telling these stories, because they're not just guiding people through tunnels, they're guiding people back to the foundations. The tunnel you're walking through now is quieter than any before it, not just in sound, but in history. There are no plaques here, no polished oculi above, no signs telling you which noble walked these walls or which engineer sketched these arches. And yet something about this space feels heavier, as if the walls themselves are holding on to names you'll never read, names that never made it into tour books or inspection logs or faded plaques. Dubois walks ahead more slowly now, his lantern casting long shadows against the moss-darkened brick. He doesn't speak right away, which is unusual. He's let silence settle around your group, but it isn't uncomfortable. It feels appropriate. Finally he stops beside a narrow side corridor, one you wouldn't have noticed if not for his pause. It's a tight rectangular opening, barely large enough to walk through without turning sideways. This, he says quietly, is one of the old worker routes, one of the ones they didn't show on the public maps. He steps back and gestures inward, allowing your group to peer in. The tunnel is low, dark and crooked. There's a faint trickle of water inside and the unmistakable sound of a slow, continuous drip echoing off stone. They called it La Traverse des Oubliés, he continues, the passage of the forgotten. You glance at him. Why forgotten? He tilts his head, because the men and women who walked it weren't guides, weren't visitors, weren't engineers. They were the ones who cleaned, who dredged, who fixed the broken sluices by hand, often without pay, without recognition and without choice. The group falls silent again. You step closer to the edge of the passage. It smells sharper here, like wet iron, and mildew, like rotted wood and stagnant air. Not unbearable, but undeniably different. More personal. Dubois walks slowly along the main tunnel wall, running his gloved hand across a rough patch of brick. There are no statues for the ones who worked these routes, no city records listing their birthdays. Some didn't even have full names in the logs, just initials or nicknames. He points to a small chalk mark, barely a scratch really at eye level on the wall. It looks like a tally mark crossed through twice. That was how teams tracked which sections they'd completed. 1 mark per 100 metres. A cross meant they found a blockage. A second cross meant they cleared it. You nod. It's efficient. Honest. There was a man, Dubois adds, called Jacot. No last name, no birth year. But he worked the drain lines under Saint-Germain for nearly 30 years. They say he knew every tunnel by feel. Walked blindfolded once, just to prove it. Someone asks why would he work down here so long. Dubois smiles sadly. He said it was the only place in Paris where no one asked him where he came from. And there it is again, that echo of equality. The idea that down here in the half-lit corridors of runoff and labour people could be judged by what they did, not who they were. The tunnel opens slightly into a side chamber. A round vault maybe 4 metres across with a stone ledge around the edge and a single drain hole in the middle. This, Dubois says, was a break room. You raise your eyebrows. A break room, he nods. Not officially, of course. But when you've walked 6 kilometres with a rake and a lantern, and the nearest exit is a quarter-hour away, you sit where you can. He gestures to the ledge. You sit. The stone is cold, damp but solid. Comforting in its way. Some say the workers would tell stories here, Dubois continues. Others would just listen to the water. One man brought a violin down once. Played until his strings snapped from the damp. You try to picture it. A man in ragged boots, bow in hand, playing for the dark. Dubois moves toward a narrow alcove carved into the wall. Inside is a rusted tin lantern, its glass long shattered. Next to it on the floor, a small wooden box. He opens it gently. Inside are folded scraps of cloth, a broken spoon, a bundle of old twine, and a leather strap marked with 3 notches. We believe this was someone's kit, he says. Left behind, or maybe just hidden. For the next shift, for the next life. No one says anything for a long time. You feel the weight of it. The physical work. The unseen work. The kind of work that doesn't make it into statues or poems, but makes every statue and poem possible. Dubois finally speaks again. The city changed because of them. Not just because of what they built, but because of how they worked. Quiet, consistent, thorough. They didn't write pamphlets, they didn't give speeches, but they kept the city from collapsing. He walks toward a plaque on the opposite wall. It's plain. No gold, no wreaths, just carved limestone. The words are simple, à ceux qui ont travaillé sans qu'on les voie. To those who worked unseen. You reach out and touch it. Cool. Still. This plaque wasn't part of the original tour route. It wasn't here for the noble visitors or the Enlightenment philosophers. It was added years later after someone, perhaps a former worker, perhaps a son or daughter, petitioned the city to remember the nameless. Dubois lets you stand there in silence for a long time. Finally he says, "It's not the filth that breaks people. It's the forgetting." You nod. Because now you know their names may be gone, but their work it never left. It flows beneath every street. It supports every bridge. It carries Paris quietly and visibly faithfully. And down here in the forgotten corridors, you're closer to that truth than anywhere above. Closer to the people who didn't just build the sewer, they held it. And through it they held the city. The passage ahead is strangely peaceful. It's quieter than before, not just in volume but in atmosphere. The kind of quiet that comes after you've heard something honest, something that sits in your chest like a warm stone. You walk a little slower now, not because you're tired, but because it feels like the respectful thing to do. The tunnel is gently curved, drawing you inward like a spiral. Its walls are unadorned, its bricks older. The sheen of dampness makes them shine like polished leather in the flickering lantern light. Dubois says nothing at first. He lets the tunnel speak. The silence here isn't empty, it's full. And then as the path widens again, you see something new, something unexpected. Shelves. Dozens of them. Carved into the wall with care, each one about the size of a shoebox. Some are empty. Others hold small mysterious items, a folded letter, a cork, a scrap of ribbon, a single glove, a spoon with a broken handle, a rusted thimble, each one resting in place like a relic. Dubois stops and turns toward your group. "This," he says softly, "is what I call the gallery of the left behind." You glance at him. He nods. It's not official, not in the records, but every guide knows it. Every worker has seen it. Visitors leave things here. You step closer. There's no order to the objects, no tags, no explanations. And yet none of it feels random. It feels meaningful. These started showing up in the late 1770s, Dubois explains. At first it was just pieces of cloth, a coin, something small, a gesture. Then came the tokens, the keepsakes, the strange little objects people didn't want anymore but didn't want to throw away either. You examine one shelf. A smooth, dark stone sits in the centre. It has a date carved into it, 1779, and nothing else. Beside it, a piece of lace, yellowed and fragile. Someone in the group whispers, "Why here? Why leave them here?" Dubois replies. "Because the sewer isn't just where things go to be forgotten. It's where things go to be processed. Physically, yes, but also emotionally." He lets that hang in the air, and it makes sense. Above ground, Paris is all mirrors and perfume and polished marble. It's a city of appearances, of posture. But below is where the things you can't carry anymore can finally be put down. And maybe for some, these little offerings were exactly that. A way to surrender, a way to say goodbye. You keep walking along the wall. Each shelf reveals another story without telling it. A child's wooden toy missing one wheel. A letter folded and sealed addressed only to M. A strip of leather looped into a bracelet. A theatre programme from 1783 ink faded to near invisibility. They don't look like much on their own, but together they form a strange and tender archive, not of events, but of emotion, grief, love, regret, hope, things that were carried and then left behind for reasons no one needs to explain. Dubois continues, "Guides used to argue about whether we should remove them, clear the shelves. Some said it cluttered the tunnels, others thought it gave the place a kind of soul." He smiles faintly. "I was trained by a man named Arnaud. He said something once I never forgot. He said, 'The sewer is the last place in Paris where no one judges what you drop.'" You glance again at the shelves, and you believe it. Because down here, surrounded by the sound of slow-moving water and the soft shuffle of boots on stone, no one asks why a spoon or a torn handkerchief matters. It just does. Even today, people still add to the shelves. Dubois points to a more recent item, a small rubber ring like the kind used to seal plumbing joints. It's clean, unworn. "Left 2 months ago," he says. "A plumber came on a tour. At the end he walked over and set it down, didn't say a word." You smile, because sometimes that's enough. Sometimes you don't need to explain the weight of a thing, you just need to release it. And this place strangely beautifully is made for that. The group moves forward. You trail behind a little, letting the shadows linger. You reach one last shelf near the end of the corridor. It holds only one item, a single playing card. The Queen of Hearts. It's pristine. No writing, no markings. Just resting there like a final wink from someone long gone. Dubois calls you forward again. You catch up as he leads the group into a side chamber round dry and nearly silent. Here the walls are smooth and plain. no shelves, no pipes, just space. And in the centre of the room is a box, wooden, closed, about the size of a bread loaf. He kneels beside it and opens it carefully. Inside are dozens of notes, folded slips of paper napkins, even the torn corners of old ticket stubs, all covered in handwriting, some tight and careful, others scribbled. You peer over his shoulder. They're messages, left by visitors. Some say thank you, some say goodbye. One reads, "You helped me breathe." Another, "I forgive you, it's okay now." Dubois doesn't read aloud. He doesn't have to. This room, like the shelves, isn't about history in the usual sense. It's not about kings or reformers. It's about people who came down here to see where the waste went and realised along the way that they had some waste of their own to let go of. He closes the box gently and stands. This isn't part of the official tour, he says. Never was. But some of us guides, we show it anyway. You nod. You're grateful. Because now more than ever, the sewer doesn't feel like a place that's beneath Paris. It feels like its foundation, not just of stone and pipe, but of everything that Paris is made of. People. Messy, hopeful, grieving, joyful people who love, who lose, who carry more than they should, and who sometimes need a place to put things down, even if it's just a card, or a ribbon, or a breath they've been holding for years. The path ahead curves gently, and as you follow it, the tunnel begins to rise. Not dramatically, just a slow, quiet incline, the kind you feel more in your legs than in your eyes. The air is still damp but lighter, not because you're near the surface, because you're approaching something else. Something with weight. Not physical weight, but meaning. Dubois walks ahead of the group, now slower than before. Not for dramatic effect, but with a kind of quiet respect. He doesn't speak at first, and neither do you. The echoes of your footsteps move ahead of you as if clearing the way. You emerge into a large circular chamber, and instantly the mood shifts. The ceiling stretches high above, forming a shallow dome. The sound of dripping water is clearer here, more melodic. Around the room are arched doorways, 8 of them leading in all directions. Over each is a name carved in stone. Montmartre, Marais, Bercy, Quartier Latin, West, Belleville, Louvre, Lumière. You recognise many of them. Neighbourhoods, historical sectors, and then Lumière. Dubois stops in the centre of the chamber. This, he says. His voice softened by the space was called the Convergence Room. You look around, the name fits. Each tunnel, each branch of the city's underground network feeds into this space. It's a meeting point not just for runoff or drainage, but for everything. This is where they ended the tours, Dubois continues. Always. He gestures to the stone floor worn smooth in the centre. Guides would bring people here and let them sit. No speech, no demonstration, just silence. You understand why. Because standing here, surrounded by all the arteries of Paris converging in one massive breath, something settles inside you. A realization not loud, not grand, just quiet. That this is what it was always leading to. The history, the engineering, the myths, the symbols, all of it flows here. Dubois reaches into his coat pocket and pulls out a small leather-bound notebook. Its cover is worn, edges curled from use. We carry these, he says, each guide, not because the Bureau asks us to, but because we need to remember. He opens it slowly. Inside are pages filled with notes, not technical diagrams, not maintenance schedules, but reflections, moments, fragments of memory. He reads a few aloud. April 14th. Rain outside. A woman asked if the water here ever stops. I told her no. It waits sometimes, but it doesn't stop. October 3rd. A child pointed to the dark tunnel and said, "That's where the city dreams." June 21st. First tour back after my father passed. I didn't speak much. Let the tunnel say it. Each line is brief, simple, but together they are a record not of the system itself, but of its impact. Dubois closes the book. "We used to sit right here," he says, tapping the floor, after the visitors left, just for a moment, to breathe. Because even when the tours were done, the water was still moving. The sewer didn't care about our schedules. You walk to one of the stone benches set into the wall and sit. The cold seeps through your coat, grounding you. Above, the faintest trickle of water echoes like a metronome, and you start to notice something else. This place isn't designed to impress, not like the theatres above ground. There are no chandeliers, no carvings of cherubs or triumphal arches, and yet it humbles you. Because it's here in this damp, echoing chamber that you realise the Paris sewer isn't just about sanitation, it's about connection. This chamber, this convergence, is the physical embodiment of that, where every tunnel comes home, where every drop has a place. Dubois stands now at the tunnel marked Lumière. You know what that word means, he says. Light. And for a moment it's ironic, because this is perhaps the darkest part of the sewer, but it's also the most enlightened. He tells you this tunnel was the last one added before the Revolution. Built in 1788, it was meant to carry overflow from the newly expanded Marais district. But the engineers named it not for geography, but for philosophy. Some of them believed that knowledge didn't just live in books, Dubois says. It lived in systems, in structure, in places where no one thought to look. You trace the word carved above the archway, lumière, and suddenly the metaphor is clear. This isn't just where waste meets, it's where truth does, where illusions are flushed out and what remains is practical, real, quiet. Dubois walks a slow circle through the chamber. There's a story he begins about a guide who led his final tour here in 1789, just weeks before the Bastille fell. The guide's name was Roux. He had led tours for 21 years. The night of his last tour, he told his guests that this room represented everything he loved about Paris, not the gold, not the grandeur, but the fact that beneath it all someone had made a plan. Someone had said, "We can manage this." That Roux said is civilization. You sit in silence for a while, and you begin to realise this wasn't just the end of the tour, it was a kind of pilgrimage to the heart of the unseen, to the structure beneath the sparkle, to the movement beneath the stillness. Dubois finally breaks the quiet. "I don't know what people expect when they come down here. Some think it'll be a spectacle. Some think it'll be disgusting. Some come to make fun of it." He turns. But most, he says, leave different. You understand. Because in this chamber, this unglamorous, symmetrical, echoing space, you've been shown something rare. A system that doesn't need praise to keep working. A structure that carries your burdens even when you forget it's there. A city that remembers what it owes to the dark. And as the water slips past, unhurried, unbothered, you think, let the world change. Let the surface churn. Let revolutions come. Below the tunnels will hold. The water will flow, and Paris will go on. Leaving the convergence room behind feels a little like waking from a long, heavy dream. Your steps are slower now, not because you're tired, but because you don't want to disturb what you've just experienced. That chamber, the heart of it all, stays behind you, but its rhythm, its hum seems to follow, as if something in the water has entered your thoughts and now travels with you. Dubois leads the group into a passage that feels lighter. Not in illumination. Your lantern still casts the same flickering amber glow, but in atmosphere. The tunnel ceiling is higher, the walls wider, and there's a faint, constant breeze that moves past your face like a sigh. The air here is fresher, and with it comes a different kind of story. A story of what happens next. We've talked a lot about the past, Dubois says, his voice echoing gently off the stone. But Paris didn't stop building down here. He gestures upward where a metal pipe runs along the arch of the ceiling. It's newer than the rest, painted marked with faded stencils. By the 1800s, he continues, the sewer became more than just a place for water and waste. It became a space for experimentation. You follow him into another corridor, this one lined with heavy iron grates. Behind each, a narrow shaft descends deeper into darkness, the air wafting up cooler and metallic. These, Dubois says, are ventilation towers. The engineers began installing them after a series of accidents, gas buildups, workers collapsing. So they opened the lungs of the city. He runs his fingers along one of the iron bars. They made it breathe. You keep walking and the corridor begins to slope downward again, though gently, like the arc of a thought. It leads you to a large chamber where several wide pipes converge. There's a platform here elevated slightly above the flow, with a handrail and a set of stairs leading into the water channel. This, Dubois says, was one of the city's first full-scale testing zones. He explains by the mid-19th century Paris was changing fast, population booming, industry rising, and with that came new challenges, pollution, flooding, disease. The sewer, once a marvel of Enlightenment elegance, needed to evolve. So it did. Here, deep below the streets, engineers built a lab. Not of beakers and burners, but of bricks and flow. They redirected channels, added valves, designed new cleaning systems. They tracked how quickly water moved, how long solids settled, how gases built and released. Some guides call this area the workshop, Dubois says. Others call it the forge. You can see why. It feels like a forge, not of fire, but of ideas. You pass a wall of metal gauges, many rusted in place, but some still intact. Pressure dials, flow meters. Behind glass you spot a clipboard nailed to the wall, its paper long gone, but its clip still holding nothing with purpose. You pause in front of a mural painted in browns and blacks. It's simple, a group of men in boots and vests standing in a row holding tools. One man is holding what looks like a blueprint. They called themselves Les Mécaniciens de l'Ombre, Dubois says. The mechanics of the dark. You smile, because it's fitting. The workers who came after the Enlightenment weren't concerned with symbols or noble ideals. They were focused on making it better, faster, cleaner, safer. They changed how water was pumped, Dubois continues. They invented new ways to filter runoff. They laid the groundwork for modern sanitation all down here in tunnels that still bore the marks of 18th century labour. Historians often skip this era. It's not as poetic as the early sewer tours, not as dramatic as the Revolution. But the innovations forged in these tunnels are the ones that kept Paris from drowning literally and metaphorically. You walk past a pipe junction where rust has bled like paint across the bricks. There's a plaque set into the wall, 1872. Premier système d'écluses automatique testé ici. 1872. First automatic sluice system tested here. It's not a glamorous sign, but it matters. Because it's a reminder that the sewer didn't just hold stories, it held solutions. In a world moving faster every year, the tunnels had to adapt. And the people who worked here didn't stop at maintenance. They became inventors, engineers, visionaries in rubber boots. Dubois guides the group into a corridor that looks newer, much newer. The bricks here are uniform machine cut. The arch is reinforced with steel. Overhead, a small electric light flickers weakly. This section, he says, was added in 1924, the modern era. By then, he continues, people had stopped coming to the sewers for tours. The glamour faded. The myths passed. The city above was louder now, automobiles, electricity, radio. But down here, the work never stopped. You feel it now, the evolution. From Enlightenment ambition, to civic utility, to silent efficiency. This tunnel, though newer still, holds the same weight. You can feel it in the temperature of the air, in the echo of your own footsteps, in the quiet, undramatic pride of a job still being done. At the next bend, Dubois stops and pulls a lever on the wall. A panel opens, revealing a wide pipe still active. You hear water rushing through it, smooth and quick. That he says is rainwater from a storm last week. It passed through 10 neighbourhoods, 5 valves, and ended up here. Routed, directed, managed. He closes the panel and smiles, and no one above noticed. You don't need him to explain what that means, because now you understand. The sewer isn't here to be seen, it's here to function, and when it works well, it disappears. But the people who walk these tunnels, the ones who guided, who cleaned, who built, who reinvented, they were never just workers, they were guardians of the city, of its systems, of its breath. And even now, as you walk through this quiet industrial tunnel, with pipes humming and lights flickering, you feel it. You're walking through resilience, through continuity, through a place that has never stopped adapting quietly, faithfully beneath the noise. The path ahead begins to stretch, not downward, not upward, just forward, a long straight corridor carved without flourish or vanity. There are no arches, no commemorative plaques, no dramatic lighting from cleverly placed oculi. Just brick worn smooth from centuries of condensation and a faint scent of stone and water that no longer surprises you. The air is not cleaner, it's not heavier, it simply is. You're in the final stretch, and somehow you know it. Dubois walks at the front of the group, his lantern swinging slightly with each step. Its light bobs and trembles across the walls, illuminating only what's directly ahead. Nothing more, nothing less. His voice when it comes is quiet, even, almost conversational. This corridor, he says, was never built for ceremony. There's no architecture here, nothing to impress, and that's why I always bring people this way. You walk in silence behind him, your boots echoing softly off the low ceiling. The tunnel isn't cramped, but it's intimate. You're close enough to hear the drip of a tiny leak somewhere behind the wall, the faint trickle of water somewhere ahead. Then he adds almost offhand, this was where the old guides ended their tours, the ones who didn't care for applause. You glance at the walls, there are no decorations, but then you see it. A small mark, carved low just above the waterline. A triangle. Below it the initials LJ. Every guide Dubois explains left something. A mark. A moment. Not for show. Just to say I was here. I did this. You begin to notice them. Subtle. Tucked away. VG next to a small flower etched into the mortar. 86 with no initials, just a quiet year. Je pars en paix. I leave in peace. It's not vandalism. It doesn't feel rebellious. It feels like closure. Like people putting themselves back into the stone before stepping into the world above again. The group slows. The tunnel demands it. The longer you're in this space, the more your thoughts grow still. The air feels sacred, not because it's special, but because of what it lacks. There's no pressure here, no stories to perform, no symbols to interpret, just the sound of moving water, and the presence of those who have come before. Dubois leads you to a side alcove. It's small, curved into the wall like a bench, but not meant for comfort. At its centre is a shallow niche, flat dry, carved about the width of your palm. Inside the niche is a folded paper, yellowed, torn at the edge, untouched by time somehow. Dubois doesn't reach for it, neither do you. Instead, he simply says, "Some people bring things down here to leave, not like the gallery we saw earlier, not trinkets, something else." He nods. Final thoughts. The paper isn't labelled. You don't know who wrote it or when, but you feel the weight of it, the gesture, to walk all this way, to carry something for so long, and then to leave it in the dark. You step back. Further along the corridor, the brick changes colour, subtle but visible in the lantern light. A different clay darker, maybe from another region, maybe from another century. Dubois runs his hand along the transition line. This is where the 19th century begins, he says, right here. He knocks gently on the stone. The engineers didn't announce it, but they knew. Everything past this point was about the future. Everything behind us memory. You cross the threshold. On the other side, everything looks the same, but feels different. The water flows faster. The walls are straighter. The system has become more efficient, but something else has changed too. The marks are gone. There are no initials here. No scratches, no dates, no symbols. The stone is quiet. The stone is working. Because that was the shift, Dubois explains. As Paris modernized, the sewer stopped being a place of reflection and became a place of purpose. Silent sealed, optimized. No more room for sentiment. No more time for names. It's better, he says. Cleaner. Stronger. Safer. He walks ahead. But it's also lonelier. You continue until the corridor bends gently right. At the bend is a bench, worn but still intact, carved from a single piece of limestone, its edges rounded from decades, maybe centuries of hands and hips brushing past. Dubois stops. This is where I sit, he says, on my last tour of the season. He places his lantern on the bench and it casts a wide, soft glow across the corridor walls. I don't say anything. I let them sit. Think. Some write, some cry. Some leave a coin or a note or a scrap of thread. He picks up a small folded paper tucked behind a crack in the wall. Doesn't open it. Just places it gently back. No guide tells the same story. But we all end the same way. You understand what he means. This isn't just a tour, it's a rite. You look down the corridor, it narrows again just before turning sharply upward. That's the exit. The way out. The way back to air and noise and wind and the smell of coffee and the faint clang of the tram line. But you don't walk toward it yet, because Dubois gestures for you to wait. Then he steps to the centre of the corridor and with the practised ease of someone who's done this 1,000 times, he begins to speak not loudly, not solemnly, just clearly. So you can hear him. This is where we leave it. He taps the wall beside him, the weight, the story, the questions you brought, the people you thought about. You don't have to carry them above if you don't want to. He places his hand flat on the stone. The sewer is good at holding things. A pause, and it will keep holding long after we're gone. You close your eyes for a moment. Let it land. Let it settle. Then Dubois lifts the lantern again, takes one final step forward and says only, "When you're ready." The group doesn't rush. You take your time. Because this isn't just the end of a tunnel, it's the end of something quietly enormous. Not spectacular, but permanent. You step forward, past the bench, past the marks, past the place where the names stopped being written. And as you walk into the final turn and the tunnel begins to slope up toward daylight, you look back one last time. There's nothing behind you but water and stone, and everything you've just seen, everything you've just felt, still flowing, still moving, still held. The incline is gentle at first, so gradual that you hardly notice it until your legs begin to feel the change. The corridor narrows slightly, the walls growing more, even the floor less damp. The water still flows beside you in its shallow stone trench, but it moves more quickly now, confidently, like it knows where it's going. You're rising. It's subtle but unmistakable. Each step forward carries you closer to the surface, even if no sunlight has reached you yet. The lantern's glow still defines your path and Dubois still leads the way, but the stories feel different now. Not louder, not brighter, just calmer, resolved. He walks in silence for a few minutes. Then without turning he speaks. This part, he says, was never meant to impress. But it might be the most important part of all. You look around. There are no plaques here, no arches, no tributes to past engineers. The tunnel walls are plain uniform and unadorned simple bricks set by workers you'll never know. But something in the stillness feels like a long-held breath. You pass a side alcove, just a niche in the wall with nothing in it but a pile of stone chips and a rusted iron hook. Dubois pauses beside it. This was a checkpoint, he says, for inspectors. Once a week, someone would stand here with a notebook and a lamp. If everything was flowing, they made a mark. If it wasn't, they made a call. He smiles slightly. Some of those marks are still buried in ledgers no one reads. And then he walks on. The corridor grows brighter, not because of lanterns, but because of a pale grey light that begins to seep in from somewhere ahead. You see it before you feel it. A horizontal glow that stretches across the damp brick like a promise. Dubois slows as you reach a small platform, just a raised square of stone beside a large iron hatch in the wall. He stops. This, he says, is where most people begin to think about what they've seen. He turns to face the group. Until now you've been going deeper, into the past, into the quiet, into the slow, steady rhythm of something that doesn't need recognition to matter. He glances down at the trench of flowing water beside you, but now you're coming back, and that changes things. He steps to the hatch and pulls it open with both hands. The metal groans in protest, its hinges stiff from decades of moisture and dust. Behind it is a narrow stairwell made of old limestone and streaked with black from centuries of footsteps. A current of cold air rushes down to meet you. It smells like rain, and cobblestones, and bakeries, and life. Dubois gestures to the stairs. We'll go up in a moment, he says, but first let me show you something. He walks past the hatch down a short side corridor, barely wide enough for two. You follow closely, the group quiet, now moving as one. At the end is a final room, circular, stone-lined, dry. In the centre is a bench, wooden, simple, flanked by two lanterne hooks and an old brass plaque on the wall above. Dubois doesn't speak. He lets you read it for yourself. À ceux qui sont descendus dans l'ombre pour que la lumière circule. To those who descended into darkness so that the light might flow. No names, no dates, just that. He sits on the bench. This is where my father brought me on his last day. You look at him. He doesn't elaborate. He doesn't need to. This is the room, he says softly, where we end the story. Not because it's finished, but because you're ready to carry it. The group stands in silence. You glance around. The walls are marked not with graffiti, but with handprints. Some large, some small. Some faded to nothing more than smudges. Others sharp and clear, left by people who came before. Visitors, guides, workers. You walk to one of the walls and rest your palm against the brick. It's cool, still, unmoving. But you feel something behind it. A kind of rhythm, like the city itself is pulsing gently beneath your skin. Dubois stands and lifts his lantern. He walks toward the stairwell again. This is your ascent, he says. It's not ceremonial. No trumpets, no fanfare. He smiles gently. Just steps. He begins to climb. One by one, the group follows. You stay near the back, letting the weight of the chamber stay with you a few seconds longer. Then you step forward. The stairs are narrow, spiral. They twist slowly upward, and as you climb, the light grows stronger. Not bright, but honest, natural, no longer filtered through stone and water. At the top is a hatch smaller than you imagined. Dubois opens it and steps out into daylight. One by one, the others follow. You're the last. You place a hand on the final stair, feel its chipped edge beneath your palm and rise. You emerge into a quiet street. Rue Geoffroy Saint-Hilaire. A corner of Paris few tourists know. A square shaded by young trees. A cafe across the road. A tram bell in the distance. The smell of fresh bread wafting from a boulangerie nearby. Above ground again. You exhale, it's louder here, faster, but you don't mind. because now you know what lies below. Dubois stands nearby, shielding his eyes from the pale sun. He turns to you and says quietly, "You made it." You nod. It feels insufficient, but it's all that needs to be said. The group disperses slowly. Some linger by the drain grate, others check their phones. You glance back at the metal door embedded in the sidewalk marked only with a number N12. To anyone else it's nothing, but to you it's everything. It's the entrance to a memory, to a world beneath the world, to the part of the city no one thanks but everyone depends on. You feel changed, not in a way you can explain, but in a way that will stay. Dubois turns to leave his lantern tucked beneath his coat. He doesn't wave, doesn't bow. He just walks away, as if he knows now you understand. You turn back to the street and begin walking above ground, but not above it all, because you know now what lies beneath, and you'll carry it with you, always. The first step onto the surface feels almost like a betrayal. After hours in the tunnels beneath the bricks and boulevards, your body is adjusted to darkness, to echoes, to whispers. But now standing once more on Rue Geoffroy Saint-Hilaire, blinking under an overcast sky, you're aware of every detail. The brush of wind on your cheek, the colour of the pavement, the way people move without urgency, without awareness of what lies just beneath their feet. Dubois is gone. He didn't stay to watch the group surface. He didn't wait for applause or handshakes. He simply slipped into the city and vanished just as every good guide does. He didn't lead you to a conclusion. He led you to a door. And now you're on the other side of it. You don't speak. Neither does anyone else. It's not because there's nothing to say. It's because everything that needed to be said already was down there in the tunnels where the real voice of Paris hums. You walk slowly now, not toward anything in particular, just forward. The rhythm of the surface world feels foreign at first. A delivery truck parks with a hiss. A man sips espresso in front of a tabac, scrolling through his phone. A child kicks a soccer ball against the side of a wall with a spray-painted heart on it. Two pigeons argue over a croissant crumb near the storm drain you just emerged from. You look at that drain now, different. Before it was part of the scenery. Now it's a portal, a doorway into something ancient and ongoing. And something about that realization keeps tugging at you. Because you just walk through the underbelly of a city that prides itself on appearance, and found not filth, but function. Not decay, but design. Not silence, but a voice steady and patient. You reach a small public bench. Sit. Let your bag rest beside you. The seat is cold, the metal arms worn smooth from countless hands. A few meters away, a street musician begins to play a quiet waltz on an accordion. Normally you might not notice, but now the sound echoes strangely like it belongs underground, floating through tunnels and halls of water and stone. You let yourself exhale, and you begin to think, not just about what you saw, but what it means. The Paris sewer wasn't just a triumph of civil engineering, it was a philosophy turned sideways and buried below the surface. A belief that systems should carry burdens, that order can exist in darkness, that everyone, rich or poor, must depend on the same flow. And somehow, in that unseen space, the ideals of Paris, equality, fraternity, reason, felt more alive than in any palace. Because down there no one performs, the water doesn't lie, the bricks don't pretend, the work doesn't pause for applause. You remember the writing on the walls, the initials, the tokens, the shoes, the spoon, the feather, the sealed letter, each one left quietly, respectfully. Because even though the sewer wasn't built to be sacred, it became that, over time, by labour, by memory, by being honest. And there's something holy in honesty. You glance at the people around you now. They don't know where you've been. They haven't traced the map beneath the map. They haven't touched the walls or followed the flow or heard the stories whispered through rusted grates. But they live on top of it. And now you carry it. You don't need to tell them. You just need to remember. because now you understand that a city is not just streets and spires and shops and squares. It is everything that keeps those things standing. It is the pipes and tunnels and valves, the silence beneath the sound, the effort beneath the elegance. It's the people who labour unseen, who measure gravity, who rake tunnels at midnight, who patch leaks while revolutions pass overhead. You rise from the bench and begin to walk again, not toward any destination, just walking, because that's what you do in Paris. You wander, you absorb, you forget and then remember again. And with every step you feel the system moving below. It's not dramatic, it's not loud, but it's there. Water moving, brick holding, memory whispering, someone's voice from a tour long ago still echoing through a junction chamber beneath your feet. You pass a storm drain and can't help but glance down. There it is, a quiet grate, worn with rain, filled with fallen leaves and the debris of daily life. But beneath it, a tunnel, a brick, a light, a shadow, a mark someone made 2 centuries ago, still holding, still catching runoff, still working. And it strikes you now that there's something merciful about that. The idea that a place can exist solely to carry what others cannot, to bear weight, to keep things moving, to receive what no one else will quietly, patiently, without judgment. You think of the phrase Dubois quoted near the end. The sewer is the last part of the city where no one judges what you drop. And for the first time you feel it, not just as poetry, but as truth. You walk past an old schoolyard. Children shout as they play tag. A group of teenagers lean against a wall sharing headphones, arguing softly about nothing in particular. A pair of tourists ask for directions. A street cleaner moves methodically down the curb with a rolling broom. The city breathes, because the sewer breathes first. It takes in what they leave behind and it doesn't flinch. It just flows and flows and flows. You wonder if the others from your group are still nearby. Maybe they've gone back to hotels or cafes or museums. Maybe they're walking just like you, slowly, aimlessly, lovingly, with something quiet and large now living in their chest. A sense of humility, a sense of gratitude, a new way of seeing the old world, not just in what shines, but in what holds. You walk past a bookstore. An old woman is arranging the front window. A man inside flips through a weathered hardback about the Paris of Balzac. You wonder if that book mentions the tunnels. Probably not, but that's fine. Because not all truths live in pages. Some truths live in systems, and some systems, like the sewer, don't need recognition to be essential. You reach the corner of the block and glance down once more at the ground beneath you. You smile, because you know. Right now below this stone the water moves, and somewhere far below a drop of rain that fell on a window in Montparnasse is weaving its way toward the Seine, and the system holds, and the memory flows. And Paris, real, flawed, beautiful Paris endures,